Welcome to the Independence by Design podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a business owner and ways to get unstuck from the day-to-day so we can design a business that gives us a life of independence. What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Today, I've got Jean Moncreiff on the show, and he is a fellow entrepreneur. I met him at the Small Giants Community Conference when I was giving it a keynote a couple years ago, and we immediately hit it off because he shared his story of growing and selling his business. And my gosh, did we have very similar, eerily similar experiences of where's the cash flow? What's this company worth? Started this business to have independence and freedom, and I got the exact opposite of that. And unbelievable story. And it just reinforces that the strive for independence is what we all have, but the business oftentimes swallows us up. And the goal is to put systems in place to focus on the ownership goals. And Jean is doing some really cool stuff in Metronomics, which is a coaching system that has to do with the operations, kind of like bumps into like EOS and scaling up. And he's going to explain a little bit of the differences of that system compared to what's out in the market and why he chose that after going through his entire journey. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope you enjoy this episode. If you like it, share it with someone else and give it a rating on the podcast app if you're willing and able. Jean, I'm very excited to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And looking forward to having a chat today. Yeah.
Yeah. You're about to go for a swim. So I'm between you and, is it the ocean or is it a lake?
It's a lake. So we live about 3 minutes from Lake Zurich. And it's an awesome day here today. I was out running around the lake earlier and folks are just everywhere. So we're going to try and squeeze one in this evening.
So what's the temp then? Is it like, because you're in Celsius, I mean, was it like 38?
It's probably closer to 31 at the moment, I'm going to guess, like 31, 32. So it's not like a kind of way out temperature. My daughter's down in Italy and I think she's somewhere around, close to the 38s, the 40s at the moment.
You'll love this story. So Jean, I traveled and studied and lived in Australia for a while, and I got there and they were like, "Oh, it's pretty hot right now," and I was like, "It's fine. I play soccer and I run in the sun of the summer all the time." Well, it was 41 degrees out and I went for a run, which is like 100, 103 or some shit like that. So I was just like, I got back and I was like, that was not a smart idea. Yep.
Yeah, I went for a run middle of the day today and I came back thinking it wasn't a smart idea and it was 31. So believe me.
Anyways, I digress. I'm excited because we met at Small Giants, which I couldn't think of a better community to meet people. You and I were sitting there talking. We were talking to Bill. Who else was sitting there chatting with us? I know Bo came up and
Bill was with us most of the time, and there were a couple other folks. I think it was, I'm trying to think whether it was Sam.
It was Sam.
Rabbi, Sam came up. So fantastic folks.
Yeah, just fantastic. And June, like when you told me your story, and you and I just recently had some lunch, and what I want to do in this conversation with the new format and our new the new Independence by Design framework, I was just thinking about like the red pill experience of like you learned all this the hard way, which is why I wanted to have you on. You and I both had similar stories, and it's you had this shift in mindset and you've had quite the journey. You're now helping entrepreneurs. You got a similar passion to me. And I do want to dive into is it Metronomics? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very interesting system on the operating system that kind of ties to some of the things that I really care about. But why don't you where do you want to start? Like, where did you and why did you become an entrepreneur? Like, what was the triggering event?
The red and the blue pill moment. I guess it goes back to those formative years. I grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire, and I can remember my mom's license plate having "live free or die" on it. And this whole idea of freedom, I think there were two things going on. I've been brought up in apartheid South Africa, where more than half of the country was oppressed. And we moved to the United States when I'm kind of 8, 9. I can't remember exactly when it was. And mom's license plate has this "live free or die" thing on it. And it was something that was really part of those formative years. And then the other thing is we kept moving. So every year or every 6 months, we were having garage sales and lemonade sales and this whole entrepreneurship that was going on. And I can remember kind of selling up everything. And then in the evenings on a Saturday night, my father saying, actually, we're staying here, so let's go to Kmart and buy the toys again or whatever. But this entrepreneurship kind of pill, that was when it took hold.
What did it mean to you? Like, was it more freedom or flexibility, or what was drawing you to it?
It was a mix of freedom and of independence. So we come from a country that was very regulated, and freedom was a challenge. And I remember sitting in the kitchen with my mom and having three ladies who would sit around with us, and we'd land up picking these same three ladies up from the local prison pretty regularly because they'd left their passbook at home, which was the equivalent of a passport for the Black community in South Africa. And growing up, seeing this just no freedom. When I went back to South Africa, my best friend, Cecil, he couldn't ride on the same train carriage as I could. He couldn't go to the movie
wild,
with me.
Man. Yeah.
He couldn't shop with me. So I think this thing about freedom was really instilled at very young age. And with that came entrepreneurship, having grown up there and lived in the States. And yeah.
What was the first leap in then? When did, because I know you had one of the business that we'll dive into that you scaled pretty significantly, went through some roller coaster motions, but how did you get, like, what was the kind of the stepping stone into being an entrepreneur?
Much like you in a way, was with my father. So I started going to university and kind of got bored and dropped out after the first year. Just wasn't kind of working for me. And started working with my dad. He'd been in computer programming all his life, so that's what took us to the States. Came back to South Africa and he carried on, and he saw an opportunity to sell computer hardware and equipment. So I got involved, and at the time there was this massive demand for computer chips, memory, hard drives, all those kind of things. And there were all sorts of stories about how this stuff was coming into the country. But we put adverts into the local classified ads, and we were literally selling sort of, we call bucky loads of the stuff, which is a little truck, I guess. Truck loads of memory chips and upgrades for computers and that. And that was the first entry point. And that's how I kind of got into entrepreneurship. So first year in university, and then into selling computer components with my father. And that was the start.
Well, what led to, because it was software back office automation, right? Was that what it was, or storage? I can't remember, because I mean, like, you and I were talking at lunch where it was like, because we had our software document management, and were you in the Kofax? Like, I can't remember exactly what was the crossover.
Yeah, so I went from computer memory and ended up sort of getting into a partnership with another guy, Fernando, who's kind of a mentor through the time building businesses in South Africa, and went from selling computer memory and computer hardware to becoming one of the larger companies in South Africa, just kind of supporting banks and insurance companies and all sorts of businesses. And along the way, saw the internet come. So around 97, this potential to build web content management systems, and got into building web content management systems with another team, and raised a whole lot of funding, built these systems. But along comes 2000, blood on the walls, everything falls to pieces. And that's the point that I had to pick myself up again and started working on the scanning stuff. So the first point in,
walk me through the blood on the wall. Like, so, like, because I'm that like, we gotta pick up that nugget there, because what does that mean? Like, was it customer issues? Was it cash flow issues? Or was it like obviously the technology was changing? What changed for you? How did it impact you?
So we get into building web content management systems, and back then we were calling them database driven content management systems. There was no WordPress, and the vision for us at that time was let's go out and build this thing that every kind of design agency in the world can use to put together websites. And we quickly started signing up companies like Anglo American, Johnson and Johnson. And at that time, I can remember some of the team kind of walking around Belgium with a server in a suitcase because we didn't have all these data centers. So Carl had the Sun Microsystems server in a suitcase running around Belgium. But there comes a point where all of a sudden this whole bubble bursts in the 2000s, and that's kind of the blood on the wall. We'd expanded so quickly and had offices in London, very fancy offices in Cape Town in South Africa, and all of a sudden overnight contracts start getting cancelled. So we had kind of something going with Goldman Sachs, and literally overnight there was $70,000.
How many employees did you have at that time?
We were probably about 60 people at the time. I think one of the biggest mistakes we'd made looking back to that time is we were arrogant. We wanted to be all things to all people. Instead of focusing on just building the software, we were kind of creating a design company at the same time, trying to acquire a graphic agency. And we just had no real focus. It was just grow.
Revenue.
Yeah. That was the focus.
And you said you had a partner, Fernando? Is that what you said at that time?
Yeah, he wasn't involved in the business. He actually, in that particular business, he'd stayed in the hardware side, and he was quite excited and wanted to get involved. And we actually had a bit of a fallout because we didn't want to bring him into the new business. But yeah, he wasn't involved. It was about.
So did he put up some money or something like that for you guys originally? What was the like when you, because I've been through 3 partnerships, and I've gone through a partnership buyout with my father as well, so or with his ex-silent partner. So there's always this like, we could be better together. 1 + 1 = 3, and then varying things change, roles compared to equity and all that stuff gets all muddled together. So like, what was the journey with that, or how was the journey with Fernando like that?
So the first part of the journey with Fernando was growing this memory business, this hardware business, and we did a lot of work with customers that he had really good connections with. So he had a strong network, and he got us into, at that time, a small bank called Investec, which is now a major global player. And Fernando was really good at finding opportunity and walking us into that opportunity. But we grew the business to a point where another partner came in, and it started to get more kind of complicated and more political.
Did someone else buy in then?
Yeah. So we had an office in Cape Town that we were looking after everything in Cape Town, and Victor bought in Johannesburg. And there was conflict with more partners coming in. So the idea was to create a national business. And I think basically with more people coming in and trying to mature the business and grow the business differently, we came to odds. And I saw this opportunity to get involved in this business that was a couple of shareholders putting together a business building internet software. And I thought, that's where I want to go. And ultimately we landed up kind of parting ways, and I got into this other business.
Yeah, we don't have to pick that scab too much if you don't want. Well, and because like, I mean, Jean, you like, no, like for the right, even for like the whole story arc as we get into this is like, whatever ways we want to pull into this of like, what is because it's the roles of having a job versus having ownership, the trade-offs between distributions and equity growth versus having a job, and like all those different forks in the road that we come into. And I can't even imagine having these 2 partners. Like, I mean, when the blood is in the water, what was the conversation, right? Like, I mean, did you guys have to like put more money back in, or was it just like shut this down and get rid of, just restart, or like how did you guys handle that? Or was there conflict before that happened and that just kind of like was, fueling the fire?
I think, fortunately it wasn't too difficult. We basically, at the time I was doing an MBA, so I had gone back to school and I thought I need to figure this thing out. So I'd gone back to do an MBA, and I was pretty focused on doing that. There was this other business bubbling up, and we just came to a settlement, and ultimately I got paid out a bit of money for my shares. They were looking at selling the company to another big company in South
Mm-hmm.
Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And, honestly, I actually didn't want to do that deal, because what would have happened was I would have landed up working for this other company. And that kind of goes to those core values: the freedom, the independence, the entrepreneurship. So, Fernando was saying, let's sell to this group and there'll be earnouts, and we'll all, he was going to kind of sort of go and do the next thing. But the rest of us were going to have to work in this business. And that was not where I saw my future. So
you don't want a job.
And I honestly said, give me the cash. I see this opportunity with these guys. That's where I'm going to go. And I'm going to carry on with the MBA. And that's pretty much what I did.
So tell us about the second business then. Like, what was the services? Like, what was the growth trajectory? Because I know there was you and I have reminisced over cash flow and juggling cash flow and what all this. I mean, there was a lot of similarities in some of our journey here.
So the second, or the third business, I guess, there was this memory hardware business, there's this internet business, and then pick myself up and start building what back then was Emerge. And we basically did business process management solutions for the likes of AIG and some of the big banks. So we had a piece of software that would, if you're applying if you're going to travel at that time, you would want a letter of insurance, and AIG's whole back-end system, once the phone call went through, would spit out this letter to say, Ryan, you're properly insured. So that was our business process management system running in the background. And AIG came to us and they said, amongst others, we've got all this paper we don't know what to do with. Can you kind of store the paper? So I partnered up with somebody else to put a document storage business together. And then on the front end, they said to us, we're doing all this imaging stuff, which is where the Kofax comes in.
I just love the fact that you have document storage and document. Yeah, exactly. I love it so much.
So that was number 3. And basically that was where this connection with the small giants came from as well, because I read the book called The Knack, I think it was, by Norm Brodsky. Now, Norm's got
that was so good, wasn't it?
It was such a good book.
Yep,
and he's got this fantastic storage business, city storage in Brooklyn, looking over Manhattan. His apartment's on the top floor, and there's sort of 3 stories. And I emailed Norm and I said, this was before I got into the small giants, Norm, would you mind if I came over and visited you with South African
awesome.
company?
You got a tour of the place?
Got a tour of the place. So Norm,
that's awesome.
Come over, and I went around the place with, I think, his chief operating officer, Lewis, I think. And they taught us about how they were playing this game and the pyramid. And Norm's kind of exit was when the tree in the foyer gets to the 3rd story roof, then I'm out of the business. And this is how we're playing the game with the amount of boxes. And so there were elements of great game of business in there and other things going on, which I kind of took notice of and thought, well, we need to figure out more of this. And that's ultimately how I landed.
Where was the business at for like size wise and stuff like that when you had that, when you were doing that?
So we were probably at the time, I would say around 10 million in revenue. Now, it's difficult to flip back and forth because kind of rand dollar and the South African exchange rate went from 3 to the dollar to 6 to the dollar, and now sits at about 17 to the dollar. So we were somewhere in that kind of 10 million range. And the whole, for me, it was just, can we keep growing? We've got a 5, then can we get to 10? Then can we get to 15? Then can we get to 20? And along the way, acquired businesses to help kind of make that a reality. But with that came all sorts of challenges with growth. So we sort of took on one big bank, and
as a client, you mean?
As a client,
yep.
And they almost doubled the size of the business overnight, if not more, and became probably the one client that we were seriously reliant on. We had to take about 200 part-time staff on to deliver the projects with them. And all of a sudden, if they didn't pay, cash flow was a major issue. It's like it turned into every single month chasing these guys for money.
Well, Jean, and like when as you keep going here, because like I think about I wish to God we would have had a video recorder for that lunch that we had. So here's the conundrum that I'm trying to help solve is like we get in, I think, for this independence, like I just want to do whatever I want every day. And we need the cash flow and the growth to have that. But we get the opposite. And it's like, what the hell's going on here? I have no cash flow. I got all these headaches and I'm juggling. How many employees did you have at that time?
So we had a core team of
part-time?
about, yeah. So with all the part-time folks, we were somewhere around 200. So we had these massive kind of scanning bureaus, and we ran teams on rotation to make sure that we could meet the sort of KPIs for these different clients and get the stuff into the system fast enough so they could process their transactions and do what they needed to do. But it's
so like how like, because I'm trying, like, where as you're growing did you start to realize like what the hell is like, because let me back up, because like, so there's this, oh hey, we got this new idea, I want to start, you sell all their business, it's like, okay, now there's this potential vision of you having more freedom and independence. So you don't have to have the earn out, you don't have to work for someone. So you start with that idea, you grab the dragon's tail of growth, and then like how long, and like did you start to get this stomach? I always try to identify like where did that feeling start to come in, and like, you know what's going on here? I need, like, I haven't gotten what I set out to achieve.
Yeah, such a good question. I think right at the beginning of this, the biggest problem is that most of us entrepreneurs, or a decent amount of us, even if you go through university, I can remember the MBA, there wasn't this focus on entrepreneurship back then. There wasn't this focus on thinking about how to build.
It's like SWOT analysis. Like, thanks.
Yeah. There's nobody was teaching us, kind of be intentional about what you're building. There was no talk about purpose back then. It was just growth, and everything was being driven by quarter on quarter growth. My mate and mentor, great guy, Fernando, and we've gone on and done many things together. But he was Portuguese background, came from Angola, ran away, I think, in the middle of the night. He's the secret police and all the challenges in Angola.
Oh my gosh.
Moves to South Africa. But he has a kind of vegetable sort of trading kind of mindset. It's like, trade it. And I think I learned a lot of bad stuff there. For all the good things that I learned from, I learned a lot of bad things. And to me, it was just like, how do we keep growing this thing and keep trading it? But it comes to a point where I think I was on a flight back to South Africa, and it might have been a small Giants event, and it may have even been the time that Bo was launching Finish Big, just kind of trying to get the time right. And I remember looking in the mirror on the plane and thinking, what the hell am I doing this for? And why am I back and forth like this?
And but you're back and forth when you're saying trading, you're trading, and like how you're talking about the vegetables. Would that be equivalent to like the hustle, where you're just going?
You just hustle.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just the whole goal was more revenue. Like, can we make more revenue? Can we make more revenue? Can we grow this thing? Can we grow this thing? And I think in part of, at the time we were hearing about companies like Amazon who weren't profitable and they were just growing. Everything was about growth.
I know.
And it seemed normal.
But I want to pull that thread, because like, so that way you could what? Like, and I guess that's what's been broken about my brain from day one, is just like, work that hard, grow, so that way you could get a pile of money and have a different, like what was the point of the hustle and the grind? Did you ever were you asking yourself that, or did you have a vision for yourself, or did Fernando have a vision for what he wanted, and you guys kind of both thought that this would be a vehicle that could get you both what you wanted?
Yeah, I don't think I put enough. I mean, I know I put thought into it, and I thought about what was important for me, but I think those important things were short-term things. Like, when we're going to kind of get another boat, we lived in this beautiful place where, in the morning you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go skiing. So the thinking was short-term. It was about new boats, new cars, things like that.
Income driven, which is okay.
Yeah. Wasn't thinking about the long term. It wasn't thinking about building assets. It was thinking about kind of keeping up with all the rest of the entrepreneurs, who were flying in and out of this town every night or every week to go to Johannesburg, work there, and then fly back in the evening or fly to the States or whatever we were doing. So it was a short-term thinking as opposed to what's the asset that I'm building? What's the long term here? What's the
and I
intention?
think it's okay. And I personally think it's like there's no right or wrong answer. Like we're like it's more just like what do you want, and like what are the trade-offs of like more income today versus more wealth tomorrow, with the whole goal like it. And it it's for me, I don't want anyone to control my time. Like I just don't want anyone to tell me what to do. And so like I just want to do whatever I want. And like the more shit I have, the more things control me. And like, but there's like this balance of like, okay, like what is it like? So I say that because like there's nothing wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong, June, with like a boat or car. Like, I mean, I like the, Dan Sullivan strategic coach, like where he talks about like, it's okay to want stuff. Like I want a lot of really cool stuff things, but what's the trade-off of that? And like being going back to what we said, the opposite of what you wanted, which is independence, right?
Exactly. And you don't think about that. You think that it's giving you the independence or the whatever, but it's not. You're not building that independence. And I was never, I love the word that you sort of used to use about it being intentional.
Intentional, yeah. Intentional independence could both be probably thrown together in one sentence.
Yeah, I don't think that as entrepreneurs, that word comes up very often in our vocabulary. It may be more so today, but back then it wasn't really about being intentional about building something. It was, let's build it as much as we can, maybe sell it if we can, at whatever we can kind of get it for it. And we were talking about maybe we can get sort of PE of this or multiple of that. But it was never really about building something and making it sort of filtering those decisions and saying, if I buy a boat,
how would you done things differently? Like, yeah, you're saying you're on this plane. So like, what would you have done? And not to say like, just to preface it too, June, like I hate that word because I wouldn't change a thing, but I'm happy with how I've changed. It's kind of how I like to say like that regret thing. But like, if you were to think mechanically, like you're sitting on this plane, you're starting to feel a little trapped or stuck. Like what, like, and now looking completely back, and I don't know if you want to give like the full story arc, but kind of just do a little reflection of like how it went, and then how you would have maybe potentially done things differently.
I think it's great question. I think there's a number of times that reflecting and thinking about things differently. Let me back up. I think at that age, we're far more arrogant and there's more ego. So, when I think back to 25, even to 35, there was ego and arrogance and all those kind of things. So I think, first of all, a little bit more self-awareness, a little less ego, a little more humble would have been really good for me. And then thinking about what I'm trying to achieve in a longer term and being more focused on what that thing is that I'm trying to achieve, rather than kind of looking at all the opportunities, the shiny object kind of syndrome that we have as entrepreneurs, where we're all over the place.
Do you think ego drives the shiny object syndrome, or do you think it's creativity? Because I think it could be both sometimes.
I think I think it could be both as well. And I think definitely for me, there was an element of ego driving that. I mean, let's start this business, let's do that. And it kind of boosts your ego. You own multiple businesses, you look successful on the outside. I think if going back, there are a lot of times that I do reflect and think, if I'd just been more focused, if I'd really just focused on what I was doing right then and being more intentional about it, I think things would have turned out very different. And you're right. I love all the different forks I've taken along the way, and this is where I am today, and I'm where I need to be right now. But there were times that focus, I think the key thing is if I'd focused more and been more intentional about what I was trying to do, rather than all over the place and trying to pursue all sorts of things, that would have made a huge difference.
Because so you were growing really fast, and you and I've talked about how the growth, I mean, financially from juggling cash flow. Do you want to speak to that at any point too? Because I think the reason that I focus so much on cash flow is that like if we have good cash flow, then we can do what we want. It's not because I like to be a financial engineer. It's just like I just just truly want to wake up and have freedom over my time. And then you and I had talked about like, I was juggling payroll and all the lines of credit and all the customers, and you had similar experiences. And like, how did that? So you're sitting on the plane reading this book, and then you're starting to kind of think about something else. What were you searching for? And then how did the mechanics of the business and the customers and the growth impact your desire to look for something different?
Yeah, I think I was looking for freedom again. I think I was starting to feel like I was kind of shackled by the business. So we were in a situation where we were over reliant on a handful of customers. Before we took on this bank, we had a nice spread of about 10 good contracts. And all those contracts like came up for renewal every month. So we almost had this annuity income every single month. And that was really good and was really healthy. But then you kind of want to take it to the whole next level. This opportunity comes up, we sign on the bank, and all of a sudden there's these massive pull on cash flow, which really screwed us up.
Could we talk about talk about the mechanics of that? Because is that because you're hiring and paying these contractors all while the customer hasn't paid you? So like now you're into infrastructure costs and payroll and overhead costs versus the client who's just sitting there waiting to pay you.
Yeah. So the business that kind of funded this whole thing was software engineers, process analysts, fairly small team a small team that was able to look after all of these clients and was pretty profitable. But then along comes this opportunity, and we had to ramp up people. So straight away, your kind of costs, even though those folks were contractors, cost skyrocket. So you rely on them paying on time. We had to invest in equipment. So it was easy back then. You just kind of ring up the bank and say, hey, we need another scanner, and they'd finance the next scanner. We need another scanner, they'd finance the next one. Rolled the Kofax software in with it and all that. And that was all pretty simple. But then you have to pay it. And when the customers have stopped paying, you're kind of talking about hundreds of thousands every month between people and equipment that you're financing. It starts to burn. And what was happening at the same time was that corruption was a big issue in South Africa at the time. So we were seeing more and more, you just weren't getting contracts. You basically have to get involved in, they term kind of marketing fees or kind of under the table stuff and that sort of thing. And that went against my core values as well. So I didn't want to get involved in any of that. And on the plane, the feeling was, how do I escape what's going on here? I don't see my family. We're kind of heading for a divorce, and this just isn't what I expected it to be. It's what I signed up for. So I started
Did that
thinking,
become,
okay,
was that an obvious thing that all of a sudden happened, or was that like a slow bleed that crept in and then you became aware of that?
I definitely think it was a slow bleed. One of the times that I journaled the most was on those flights. And I think I looked in the mirror more often than once and thought, what the hell are you doing? But it was probably after Bo's book finished big that I thought, I'm just going to sell this thing, because at that time I'd started something in Denver, Colorado as well. And I was kind of going between South Africa and Colorado and doing that flight every 6 weeks or so. And it just got too much. So I think there was a slow realization that this isn't working. It's time to make a change. And I basically decided to sell the business, and then found out that it wasn't worth what I thought it was, because heavily reliant on this one client, or at least sort of one or two clients, everything was reliant on me. I hadn't built a proper leadership team, and the cash flow was a mess. So,
amen, brother, been there. Like this is where you and I spend hours talking about like, oh shit, what about all this stuff that we should have been focusing on? Did you have a partner? Did you have a partner at that time?
No. So it was me, and I had a very small leadership team. And ultimately at that point, I started to lean on some of the folks in the Small Giants more. So Rob Dubé said to me, hey, have you heard this EOS stuff? Like, why don't you try put that in? And I think Jack Stack was around once or twice, and he was kind of GGOB, open book. So we got a GGOB coach in. We started self-implementing EOS. We had these different kind of things going on.
Is this after you had that realization that the company was not worth anything? Okay.
So that happens. I mean, okay, I've got to turn this thing around, and I've got to try and make it sellable if I'm going to do anything. Otherwise, I'm never going to break out. That was kind of the feeling, like, unless I do something, there's no escape. You're stuck. And I was fortunate. There were these things called the Small Giants passport events at the time. So we'd go behind the scenes of some great Small Giants businesses like Zingerman's, Paul Spiegelman's was Beryl Health at the time.
I think Tom involved with the tasty catering.
Yeah, kind of go to tasty catering, and Tom's got all his numbers up, and yeah. So I was fortunate that I could lean on this wonderful group of people who was kind of a CEO peer group at that time.
Mm-hmm. It's like the whole mastermind of, what Napoleon Hill calls it, whether they're a formalized peer group or not, you're bouncing off of like your situation against what they've got going on to help you get closer to where you want to be.
Exactly. Yeah. You can have those vulnerable conversations with this group. But I would go back, and the leadership team that I was trying to form hadn't been part of those conversations and hadn't been involved. So there was a disconnect there. And that was, I think, one of the reasons we went with GGOB. But it really only gave us that open book management stuff. And we had a good coach, and it started working for us. But it wasn't the full picture. And even with EOS, I feel like we were kind of limited. It always felt like we were a bit limited to the 20-odd tools, and it helped us get the execution right, but there were still pieces that were missing. So 18 months down the line, ultimately what lands up happening is I do a deal with each of the senior leadership team members and sell out to each of them. I didn't want to do an earn out. Most of the deals that we were looking at involved me being involved for another 5 years. So ultimately I went for a management buyout and just kind of sold off to the rest of the team.
So very interesting. And I want to go back to like when you realized it was worth nothing. And you don't have to give any numbers if you don't want, but like then to when you did the management buyout, like this, I think a lot of life has to do with this gap between reality and expectations. And my goal is just to always have that as close to aligned as possible, because the gap is resentment and happiness, my personal belief. And so like, my guess, it sounded like there's a pretty decent gap between reality and expectations when you got that first kind of aha to then like when you had the management buyout, like what was the gap when you first figured it out, and how did you figure it out?
So, I mean, I never went to, one of the biggest mistakes I think I made was never thinking about what the valuation of the business or what that I kind of target equity valuation would be. I never went through any kind of process of having the business valued. I just sat with a napkin and thought, okay, the document business, I know another one's been bought and they paid $5 per box on the shelf. So let me just add up how many boxes we got. And that's what it should be worth. So that one's worth kind of, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 million or something. And this one over here has these contracts, and I've seen something sold like that before. So some more calculations, and that one's probably worth 3-4 million. So I kind of come up with this idea that there was probably 10 million in value in what I had. And then when I went to sell the business and we started going through the conversations, and before,
did you have an investment banker, or were you just talking to competitors, or what were you doing?
It was quite interesting, because what happened was there was this little company called HubSpot that came out around 2008, 9, yeah. And they talked about this thing called inbound marketing and writing content. So we can't compete with the big guys. Let's just start this whole writing content thing. And we started writing content, particularly for the document storage business. And all of a sudden, the CEO of the competitor rocks up in his sort of Porsche, Ferrari, or whatever it is, and what the hell's going on? Because they were doing radio advertising and billboard advertising, and wondered where all of a sudden this sort of new kid on the block was suddenly kind of stealing all their leads. So they came and paid us a visit, and Iron Mountain at the time was looking at acquiring them. And then this other company who's in fast-moving consumer goods and had a whole lot of warehousing space started talking to us, and they wanted
to buy to Norm business. at all? As far
no.
as like,
no. I mean, even my lawyer said to me, every time you walk in here, why are you so stupid? Why don't you speak to me before you do deals, or before you speak to people? And you, yeah, speak to folks who've done it around you. And I think, you know, I made so many mistakes over the years that part of why I do what I do now is to kind of be that blind spot remover for the folks that I don't go that route. Think about this first. So we had a few people interested in the business, and I was particularly interested in working with this fast-moving consumer goods crowd who, well, essentially they would do storage, and they were doing storage for a lot of our customers like Nestle, Mars, Palmolive, those sort of folks. So their goods were then, Nestle was another big client, and we were doing all Nestle's proof of deliveries, but it was coming out of this company's warehouse. So they seemed like the logical folks, and we could do business with them. And we kind of got half pregnant with them, where we actually, the CEO said, and you know, publicly traded company, Peter was really good at what he did, and he said, "Why don't you move all your boxes in here, get rid of your warehouse, and then we'll kind of hammer everything out." And we did that. Night. Super stupid. Now you're kind of half pregnant. You're stuck with the guys.
Yeah, see that. Yeah,
and things change very quickly. So, yeah. I think I've learned a lot of lessons the hard way over the years, and how
I'm professional at eating glass is what I've said.
Yeah. Just trust everybody. And I think that's so important. You don't realize when you haven't been through this that you're dealing with people who are pretty skilled at doing these deals. They've done them, and they do them day in and day out. And as you said, you know, speak to somebody who knows what they're doing. Don't go in blind. Make sure you pull together a team.
Like, I think it's when I say the red pill experience, it's like, holy shit, this thing's worth it. How do I understand the value? Because if we understand value, like if you and I were to go do a trade together, whether it's me buying your phone or a book or a desk, like we have to agree upon how value works. And if we don't know how value is driven, how do we exchange value, know our leverage, and know what our worth is? I mean, it's just, it's kind of asinine when you think about it. I mean, like, and again, it's so common, which is wild. And like, and there's nothing more like, because I had the same experience in 2009. It's like, oh, this thing's ain't worth shit. And by the way, if we sell it, we owe the bank money. Like, yay, good. What a reward that is. But like, how did you deal with that mentally and emotionally when you had that kind of balloon popping experience? And then obviously you already mentioned that you sort of get Small Giants, EOS, GGOB, but like, how did you deal with it emotionally? And because that's a tough pill to swallow.
I think I've always been pretty resilient, and it's, you know, never give up. I mean, I love Churchill's speech, just never give up, just figure this thing out. I'm not sure that's always a good thing, but definitely there was a time where I thought, I think kind of went into a bit of depression about it, but you kind of dust it off and you pick yourself up again, and there's no option but through. And I think, you know, for the first time I heard McNeil talk about this at this year's Small Giants event. You know, there's no way out but through, or something, is the way she put it. And I think that was just the only way out of this is through. And it kind of feeling sorry for myself or wallowing in despair or whatever is not going to help just get through this.
So I tend to agree. I like on face value, I tend to agree, but I want to follow up. Like, when do you think it's okay to give up?
Oh, it's such a good question. 'Cause, yeah, sometimes you just kind of keep going blindly and you don't see
Oh, it's gonna work.
exit
It's
along the
gonna
way.
work. It's gonna work. I mean, like, honestly, and the reason I ask this is because I think like there's quite a few people that shouldn't be doing what they're doing. It's like you should just go get a job at 3M, or like, I mean, you're not creating any value and your life sucks and you're barely making any money. Like, so like, yeah, let me go back to asking you, when do you think it's okay to give up?
It's for me, it's such a difficult question because I think I'm really bad at it. I never want to give up. And um, the question you asked me earlier about reflecting on what's happened over the years, I think if there's more focus on what you're doing, if you're more focused and you know where you're going, you know what that ultimate goal is. And I think the problem with me was I was kind of over there and then over there and over there. And if you're very clear on where you want to go and you've got a plan to get there, you can adjust that plan. So maybe it's not giving up as much as how do I adjust the plan? And I mean, funny kind of thing when I had to go to Atlanta not long ago for Metronomics training, and the flight's cancelled, and the next flight's cancelled, and I kind of emailed the coordinator and said, "Is it even worth me coming?" And she said, "Well, if you're not going to get you on the first day, probably not." And get on the phone to BA, and the guy said, "Well, probably can't get you on a flight or whatever." So I went and stand in the queue, get to a physical, to actual person. And she's like, "I can put you through there. We can go through there." Comes a bit of a game. Long story short, I got there with no luggage, but I got there kind of an hour after they started. And sometimes it's just like, how do you just kind of get to course correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I I freaking love that answer, because that's like literally I've got a Google Maps couple slides that I talk about, because like I always say, June, that I will eat shit if I know why. like right, if there's no purpose of this, then I don't know why I'm doing this. But it goes back to, if there's a goal, going back, like, don't just go get a job at 3M if your goal is independence or something. But like, it's like, what's the context of the problem? And I think, going back to that story you were saying, is I think that if we know what the context is, then we can go through it, and through might be different things, and because it goes back to the ego, right? Like, I mean, I don't want to give up on something, because not only for myself, but for other people and the perception and stuff like that. But if it's giving up to get forward,
Yeah.
it's a different narrative, right?
Yeah. And I mean, going back to your point about there's a lot of people out there who should be giving up. I think maybe we do confuse entrepreneurship with freedom, and we think we're entrepreneurs, and the whole startup thing is almost like kind of having a Louis Vuitton bag. I've got a startup, 9 out of 10 of these things fail. And I don't think entrepreneurship is for everyone. I think there's this confusion between, I'm going to go off and become an entrepreneur and become free. There's a hell of a lot of work to being an entrepreneur, to building something. You could probably find freedom somehow in a corporate world as well. I mean, it depends on what your definition of freedom is and what freedom means to you. So, yeah,
I agree, and I want to layer in another concept on that, because like I agree with you, but I think everybody listening has already taken that, like, I've already got the virus, and so like I'm not getting rid of it. Yeah, it is. But it's this like, I'll give you a story. June, is like, this guy I got on the call with. He's like, 100 million. I'm like, well, that's like the perfect number everybody wants right now? And I'm like, why? And then he gives all these stupid answers, and I'm like, but seriously, why? And then like I asked him, like, well, if you could maintain your lifestyle at 20 or 30 grand a month net without a job, doing whatever you want, what do you think about that? He's like, that'd be awesome. I'm like, you don't need $100 million revenue company for that. And then we started talking about like cash flow, equity valuation, all these different like ESOPs. I'm like, and it just completely like burst through the prefrontal cortex. And I say that because it's like the why, I think, has to be tied to that growth, and going back to then even like because it should all then tie into operations. Like the why of your goals of cash flow and equity should then drive into your operations of what you're willing not to do and not to do.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had a very similar experience over the last few years with companies that have otherwise been phenomenal, but you sit down and you say, where's it we going? Well, 50 million. Why? Why 50 million?
Because that's what all my peers told me I should do.
Pretty much private equity. We want to get a private equity, why do you want private equity involved? Well, and they stop. Okay, so this is a family business. Are you looking to do an exit or what? Well, okay, what's private equity buying with the 50 million? No, they're not. They're buying the future growth.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And by the way, it includes you, and you're working 70 hours a week for the next 7 years. Huh?
Exactly. I still waking up. This, I sometimes feel like when you ask me, how did it make me feel? You think, am I the stupid one? Did I just not get this? But I feel like so many owners, so many entrepreneurs, whether they're at 5 million, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, don't kind of get this thing that it's not just about kind of the revenue number, the sort of bottom line and how much cash we're putting in the bank. It's about what's the big picture for this? What's the big vision? What's the intention? Where we're going with this thing? And that's when I heard you speaking at Small Giants, I think there was a whole lot of wake up kind of moments. Well, I'd already started to wake up to this, but I think things started to really come together. You spoke, and then I think straight after you, or just before you, Elizabeth spoke and Connie spoke, and it was a really good, what was the theme? Transformation, I think was the theme. And you'd gone through the transformation in your business with your dad and how that had impacted you, and Connie, how things had impacted her, and Elizabeth, how she had been impacted, and the change of leadership. And there was just this real wake up at that Small Giants event where a light bulb went off, and it was like, wow, this is all just suddenly come together. We actually none of us are trained in this stuff. We don't know what we're getting into. Your dad was how old at the time? Probably my age now. I'm 50. I don't know how he was when you got involved in the business.
How about Jean, how about this? So we sold the business 10 years ago this month, and he was exactly my age when he started the business. So he was 37. I'm turning 38.
37.
Yeah. So like, it's this weird, like, fun house mirror, like I was your age, and you like, and like when you took the mortgage out and bought all the copiers, and like, so it's, but like, and what I think is so fascinating, June, is that like with the Vistage workshops and all that stuff, because you now playing the same, like you're working with a lot of these same people as me, is like I'd be sitting in these Vistage meetings in the morning, where they got the coffee and everybody's kind of doing the chit chat, and it's this perpetual like, what people are buying, how much they're traveling, what they're doing, obviously interest rate conversations. And I'm like, it's all like, but like everyone wants more time. And I'm sitting here going like, who gives a shit about any of this if you have no control over your time? And now disproportionately 2/3 or whatever, and this is not from Vistage, this is just my own anecdotal information or experiences. 2/3 of people are owned by private equity, and they have jobs. And sitting here going, I have more control over my time than you do. I don't care. Yeah. Like, and so like, it's just this wild, like, we're all people. And so like business is a means for us. It's kind of like money. It's a means for us to get what we want. But if we don't know what we want, what the hell are we doing?
What the hell? Exactly. Yeah. And that's what we all just want. Everybody swim out wanting a bit of time. And you're right. So many businesses are now owned by private equity, and they're no longer in charge of their own destiny anyway. I worked with a team not long ago, and poor old Ian had become a slave to the private equity guys.
Internal rate of return within this time period, it serves its own purpose, and I don't begrudge it for everything, but it's just kind of like anything over its allocation is part of a cancer, right? Like, I mean, it should be, everything should be within balance. And I say this because it's just so fascinating. We're like, back to your, like your point when we're talking about growth, or we're talking about people's goals. What I find super fascinating is like you went through this whole like, okay, take the red pill, got to do something with my business to create something of value. And I have another question about that, but I want to finish my thought. Is like you went through all these GGOB, small, in small giants, introduced the GGOB, EOS. Yet you then now with what you're doing is Metronomics, and I find it very fascinating why you picked them. And I think we could I resonated with why you picked Metronomics because it's some of the components that it all ties together. So why them and compare, and like even though you used other things that worked for you?
Yeah, I think so. The story behind it was I was working with these folks who wanted to get a 50 million, and the CEO in waiting sort of turned around to me one day, and we were about to put EOS in, and he said to me, "Have you read this book, Three Hag?" And I said to him, "God, I don't know, but it sounds like a kind of witch on a broomstick thing."
That's awesome.
So I pick up the book, I read the book, and I come back and I think, hey, this is kind of interesting because with EOS we had these 20 odd tools, and we had to stay in the playpen. You couldn't really go out of it, and that was fine for the first couple of years. But once you get that execution dialed in, it was like, okay, where to next? I'm kind of starting to hit a ceiling here. And what I found with Metronomics and Shannon is she'd been in a very similar place. So after reading Three Hag, I got onto a call with her, and she told me her whole story about having been a desperate CEO herself and kind of trying to figure it all out, and so reading Jim Collins and going to GGOB and doing scaling up and all the stuff that I'd done as well. And what really attracted me to Metronomics are probably three key things. One, it's a framework that keeps evolving. So when we talk about having when we talk about have this conversation about getting more intentional about kind of target equity valuation, and that at the moment that's not part of Metronomics, but it would be something that a coach could quite easily introduce and just say, and in fact is what I'm starting to do with my clients is we've got our sort of revenue number for the next 3 years, we've got our profit number, we've got what's in the bank, but what's our target equity valuation now? And I just bring that into the system that I'm coaching them with. There's a whole team of coaches who are constantly looking at what's happening out there. So I think Kyan Krippendorf has just released a book on proximity at the moment, and how proximity is going to affect us, and there's sort of 36 stratagems that he talks about. So how can we put those in the toolbox and use them in Metronomics? A very big one for us at the moment is Dr. Benjamin Hardy and rapid transformation. So Ben's talking about, like, how do we raise the floor, and could we take what we're trying to achieve with our BHAG and bring it down to 3 years, and what we're trying to do in 3 years and bring it to 1 year. So we're starting to bring some of Ben's stuff in.
Is that like the 20x or the what do they call it? The 10x is the 10x.
Yeah, 10x is easier than 2 times.
Yep.
Kind of, I guess Ben went and wrote those with Dan Sullivan, and I's gone off on his own and has this book, Rapid Transformation, coming out. But he, during the last Tip Top event, did a workshop with us internally and said, how do you look at doing this yourselves as coaches, and how do you work with your customers on this? And I've kind of sat down with clients and said to them, well, clean slate, how would we take where we want to be in 10 years, get there in 3, and how would we get there in the next year? And it forces you to think differently, and it forces you to focus, and forces you to say no to a whole lot of things. Like, you kind of raise the bar and you say, well, there's only really 2 ways to get there. We've got to say no to everything else. And this is where this is
an amazing experience. Yeah.
So that was a big attraction to Metronomics. It was great. I can now just kind of plug in the best of what's out there. And this was the challenge that we had, or I had early on. I think a lot of folks have, is you kind of got GGOB going, you've got EOS going. Those things are, or those systems are great, but they just kind of brought into Metronomics. So a lot of the GGOB stuff's brought in.
Well, we even talked about strategic planning, right? I mean, like,
That was the other thing.
That
Yeah.
was a big thing that when you were talking about, like, it brings in strategic planning, a lot of the finance too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Finance.
just
So
like, yeah,
you just bring it all together into
yeah,
one.
well, what a concept. I mean, like, what I find, yeah, it's so fascinating because, like, I love finding people that, like, you were scaling up GGOB, EOS, and, like, you know, I think that I'm trying, June, to be better at, like, there's a right fit for everybody, and, like, but there's certain systems where, like, people, like, refuse to think that there's anything else, and it's like, just come on. But, like, a framework is different than a system, or a framework leaves open or room for other things. But you're like, you were connecting the strategy, which is actual strategic planning, to the finance, to then, how do you implement that? And when you and I were talking, like, I think it's so fascinating. Like, ownership's goals have to be part of it. Like, you were talking about some of your clients, like, if you have two partners, like, what do they want for income? What do they want for valuation? Because, like, that'll dictate your growth. Like,
And have those conversations. Yeah.
like to not have that is insane. Like, and Junior, like this, like, a lot of times the inmates run the asylum. I mean, like, do private equity firms jump in and be like, "Hey, June, what should we do?" It's like, no, they're like, here's the ownership's goals, and the ownership's goals dictate the operations. I mean, it shouldn't be that complicated.
Yeah. And to that strategy point, we run these strategic pictures, and we kind of work through a strategic picture every quarter, meet the team with that, because different teams are going to be at different levels. Some of the leadership teams are super cohesive already. So there's things we don't need to focus on. But in that first year, it's like, how do we get execution right? How do we get the right leadership team in place? And how do we get the cash system working so they're generating revenue? Let's just focus on that in that foundation year. But different companies at different places. So some might be at a foundation level, some might be at a momentum level already, and then we can get into strategy more. And I think with some of the systems,
I like that.
you're stuck in execution. So we got to get the execution right. And working with EOS clients or EOS companies is brilliant for us. And Metronomics has all the EOS sort of language built into it already. So if you're using L1 meetings and whatever you're using, we just stick to using that. We're not going to go and try and reinvent the wheel with them.
You're enhancing them to get to their goals. Yep.
Let's graduate the strategy next.
Yeah. So that's awesome.
That's what attracted me into it. The three big things, I think: the flexibility, the idea of a 3-year plan. So this 3-year highly achievable goal, which none of the other systems really had in the level of detail that Metronomics has, and goes to financial level and kind of swim lanes and forecasting out 36 months and all those good things. And then this focus on strategy. And we keep iterating that whole strategic picture. So we've got probably 12 pictures that we're going through, from where are you playing in the market, what are your attributes to make you different, and we just keep iterating through those and improving on them.
That's fantastic. You having fun?
Yeah, I love it.
That's
really
awesome.
enjoying it.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it goes to that core purpose now, which is to helping business owners thrive and prosper, and that's what I love doing.
So I was going to ask you, because you have had a similar journey to me, where, like, and I found this out the hard way. So, like, went from having an infrastructure where I found out that I really like having an infrastructure, and, like, the amount of change and leverage that I can have if I'm up top, like how fun that is. But then over the last 10 years, I had 3 startups that I bootstrapped, and I hate that. And now I'm now with my business, it's a coaching system business where, like, it's leverage, where I don't have to have a big infrastructure. My goal is not to create a bunch of equity value. It took me a long time to figure out, like, the different spectrum of that. Like, how have you gone through that, of, like, to figure out what your goals are and how it relates to having a big infrastructure like you had, to now helping people with big infrastructures? I
think I don't want to grow something that's huge anymore. A small core team that works. But this was something I rereading Bo's book the other day. He said something about, right at the end of Finish Big, was, once you've done that exit, most entrepreneurs are kind of shy away from going anything over a few people, building anything over a few people the second time around. I've been there for a long
I
time.
learned the lesson the hard way a couple of times there, buddy.
But I think the way forward is partnerships. I think if you think about what you want to create and what you want to do in the world, as for folks like us, I think the way forward for folks like us is that you think really big, what it is that you want to do and how you want to help folks, but you can't do it all alone. And I think partnerships are the way to achieve that. So you have a new approach that you're building and putting together. And I know that a lot of the folks that I work with, that would be super helpful for them. The work that Dr. Hardy's doing, you bring that in. I think partially Metronomics has kind of opened that up for me is
massive collaboration.
Massive collaboration now. And I think of Nick Bradley, a mutual sort of friend. Nick is insanely good in that private equity space and knowing how to kind of navigate that. It's something I'm never going to be an expert in, but loads of my clients are going to need that. So how do you work? How do we collaborate? And I think that's how I'm thinking about growth this time around is how do you achieve what you're trying to achieve through collaboration?
And I'll add a layer to that, June, is through massive trust. Cause I think about how cool Small Giants is. I've been in a lot of different peer groups and ecosystems and stuff like that. And the acceleration to amazing, trustworthy people is so huge. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people are missing these days. I mean, I know I struggle with that. It's like, I think you actually said it in the middle of this conversation, right? Like, it's like, I trust first. And then it's like whether it's vendors or service providers or whoever it is. And then you're like, oh my God, I didn't get even close to what I expected. And so
exactly. Naturally trustworthy. And you feel like an idiot every time you think, why did I not think this through? And you go back to that conversation with the lawyer. Is there a reason that you sat and did this without me involved?
Yeah. This has been fun. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you'd like to bring up?
I think we covered so much. I'm really excited about where it is that Ryan's going and what is it you're putting together.
It's the ownership framework, June. It's going to be fun because I think, like you said, took me 10 years, but I think the ownership framework has been missing, right? So there's all these operational ones for the owner operator. I mean, and I think Metronomics is one of the more interesting ones out there because of how many things it puts together. We don't have to kind of clobber a bunch of stuff together, but it's like, what do those owners want? And what's a process to think through it? Like, how do we get and actually I put this on now, my material is, Bo's, the 25% are happy. He never came up with a how-to guide. And I want to flip that. 75% of the people should be happy, no matter how.
Yes. Yeah. How do you flip that? How do you turn it on its head? And there's some fantastic communities out there. And I think the direction of travel is toward what we're talking about, toward more purpose-driven companies. As AI comes out and becomes more pervasive, I think a lot of what's going to happen is going to be about relationships and the relationships that we build versus kind of how do we use AI and how do we build better relationships with
it literally becomes like, what does it mean to be human? How do we become more human the more this stuff accelerates, which is very fascinating. It should be fun if people can keep focused on the right things.
Yeah.
June, where's everybody able to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn's always the best, and then website, I'll shoot you those details over. But LinkedIn and website, yeah.
Cool.
Brilliant.
June, thank you so much for coming on, man. This has been awesome.
Thank you. Been brilliant.
Thanks for tuning in and spending your time with June and I hope you found some good takeaways. I think it's unbelievably important to highlight the critical nature of clarifying your ownership goals. What do you want to be doing with your time? How much cash flow do you need? And then specifically, how are you going to decouple your operating role and your income, and then take your income and cash flow from distributions? And how does that impact your equity valuation and in what timeline? Because at the end of the day, the trade-offs that you have as the owners, should you reinvest back in the business and what's going to be your return? Or should you take the money out for your lifestyle or for outside savings? And how does that impact your goals? And by you understanding how clear And by you understanding your goals, the operations should know exactly how much they have to fund the growth and what the return expectation should be, and using the financials as the benchmark of whether you're on track or off track, and then making sure that all the functional areas are synced up using the financials. And it's just fascinating to me to hear a little bit more about Metronomics, what June is doing. But regardless, I think you need an operating system and an ownership system. And I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll see you next week.